Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Cool. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. Thank you to Chaplain Cole for all of your support.
Thanks. I'm going to give you your introduction real quick.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So good evening, friends and family and siblings. For tonight's Teach the Truth Thursdays, we are incredibly excited to introduce an amazing Athens anti-discrimination movement volunteer, Ms. Annie Markham. Annie Markham is a registered yoga teacher, an RYT 500 and certified iRest instructor. She teaches private yoga and iRest classes out of her home studio. She calls it the Yoga Hut. Annie sees yoga and meditation as a pathway to connection, first within oneself and then to the world. Annie hopes the practice of iRest can meet you where you are today and give you a sense of your inner ground of stability and ease that will carry you through all of life's challenges. Annie was deeply struck by the events of 2020 and the systemic racism that is evident in our society. So she began volunteering with the Athens anti-discrimination movement as a way to counteract her role in the system. Since then, she has participated in voter engagement events and community events, which have deeply inspired her to stay connected to the cause and help in whatever way she can. Annie is also a mother to 2 children who give her the strength and courage to meet each day while reminding her what it feels like to live in the present, full of joy and light. Without any further ado, is Annie Markham.
Thank you. That was such a nice intro. Thank you, Chaplain Cole. And thanks for all of your help in getting this set up. I really appreciate it. And I am so happy and honored to be sharing some iRest with you all tonight. We've just got about 30 minutes, so I'm gonna go right into a little presentation that I have to kind of introduce you to the practice of iRest. And then we'll do a short practice depending on how much time we have. And then I'll give a few minutes if there's any questions or feedback, and then we'll take a break just around 5:30. So I'm going to share my screen to get us into the presentation. Okay, so iRest. First of all, before we actually get to here, iRest is a practice of meditation. iRest stands for Integrative Restoration. So the idea is that it's integrative because it integrates basically every level of your being: body, mind, heart, breath. And then restoration, in that the idea is that it restores you to your innate ground of well-being and ease. Integrative restoration. The founder, Richard Miller, just kind of went with iRest. It was right around the whole iPod craze, so he thought it would stick, and it turns out it did. Okay, so the 10-step protocol. This is basically the outline of the iRest practice. Generally, the practice is about 45 minutes. We don't have that much time tonight, so it's probably going to be about a 15-20-minute practice once we get through the intro. But it essentially always follows this 10-step protocol. And the intention with that is that with each step, you are taken deeper into your own experience and into the experience of the practice. So the first step is to ask yourself, what is your heartfelt desire? How do you want to feel in this life? How do you want to live this life? What's most important to you? These questions are just inquiries for you to have. You don't need to have an answer. It never even has to be words. It could just be like a felt sense that you have that aligns you with your heart's deepest desire. Then the next one is your intention. So your heartfelt desire is like the grand scheme. And then your intention is like a short-term goal. And it is as short-term as this practice, this 10-minute practice, or however long you're meditating for. Your intention is what grounds you in this particular activity. of this moment. And the intention ideally helps to align you towards your heart's deepest desire. So then third would be the inner resource. And the inner resource is really the crux of this practice. It's basically the nugget that I hope you take with you tonight and that I focus on the most in my personal practice. The idea of the inner resource is that we all have this felt sense in our body of safety and security that we've had since birth and that will take us through this life. For a lot of people, this can be difficult to find at first, especially if you're somebody who had any trauma. And when we're talking about systemic racism, there's also a lot of systemic trauma. So this can be a new idea, and it can be difficult to find at first. So the important thing is just to play with how it works for you. It might not be the word safety. That might not ring true for you. It might just be the word well-being or ease or security. Whatever word resonates with you that allows you to feel, or enoughness. I like that. That's really good. Yeah, whatever word allows you to feel that sense. It's however it taps in for you. And so with the inner resource, it's in the body. That's a particular part of this practice that struck me and allowed me to really commit to it, is that it's all about what you feel in your body. So it doesn't really have to be something that you think about or even fully understand. Like I said before, you don't have to even have words for it. If you can tap into the felt sense of it, then you can remember that feeling and you can nurture and grow that feeling. And so then when you're out in your life and the inevitable challenges of your life come up, you can just step back in. Where do I feel this? How can I find that felt sense of security, safety, enoughness, whatever it is for you? So then that's the real beauty of this practice, is that felt sense of your inner resource. If you can practice going there and feeling it, it'll come up for you in your daily life, even when you experience something difficult. So then the fourth one is body sensing. And so the idea here is that you're just rotating your attention through your body. You're not trying to feel something and you're not trying to relax. You're simply welcoming whatever sensation is there. This can also be sort of challenging for people at first because we tend to think with the mind. So when we start body sensing, we often visualize the hand or the leg or whatever it is. But you're trying to get to a place where you're feeling your way through the body and not thinking first. So you can just kind of experiment with that when we go through the practice. See if you can notice that the visual image often comes up right away, but then let that visual fade and just stay in the feeling of it. So then after you go through this body sensing, you move towards breath sensing. Just like in body sensing, there's no fixing of the breath. There's no changing of the breath. You're simply acknowledging and welcoming the breath as it comes and goes in the body. So breath and body sensing are really a pair, and the intention with those two steps of the practice are to just draw you really deep into your own felt experience. So you kind of drop out of the thinking mind and you drop more into the body. And just a quick aside, iRest is actually a research-based practice. So that's one thing that's really cool about this particular meditation style, is that the whole time it's been used, it's been researched. And so another interesting thing is that in 2008, the US government actually adopted it as an official form of treatment for veterans with PTSD, because it's been shown to be really effective at treating people's difficulties and really, as I said, meeting them exactly where they are. And one of the ways that's really key is in moving out of thinking and into the body. And what they find when they do the research on iRest is that the breath sensing and the body sensing, it starts to shut down that part of your brain that is thinking, planning, organizing, where we typically spend most of our days. And it helps to light up this part of the brain that's more presence centered, and it can slow down, and you can kind of feel yourself calming. You kind of drop deeper. So that's one thing that's pretty cool about this practice is you can look up research studies that show what it does to your brain and how it's really effective in the long term. So after body and breath sensing, hopefully you're really deep in the feeling of your body and you're less in your thinking mind. So then you're available to welcome emotions and welcome thoughts. These two are often together as well. And the idea with this is that in our daily lives, it can often be difficult to sit with particular emotions and thoughts. They can be overwhelming, they can be triggering, they can be scary. I mean, they can even be joyful and really happy, but they're still, pretty engaging. So when you go through this first 5 steps of the practice and you get pretty deep in that relaxed state, you're more able to welcome emotions and thoughts without completely taking off. You can sit with them and just be with them exactly as they are. And that's a really powerful tool, because so much of our time is spent judging our thoughts, judging our emotions, reacting to them. And so when we can get really deep and still, and then just let the emotion come up and just let the thought come up, we can feel how I'm okay. I can be with this and still be okay. And so having that felt sense experience of welcoming an emotion and welcoming a thought that might be difficult in daily life, but you can be with it in your iRest practice, it's empowering and hopefully stays with you so that the next time you're in a moment of reaction because of something difficult, you can remind yourself, I know I have the tools to be with this. It just might take me some time to get back there. So tonight's practice is going to be kind of short, so we won't have as much time to work with the emotions and thoughts aspect of the practice, but I highly recommend that you Google iRest and see if you can find some practices. There are a lot on YouTube. There's also an app called Insight Timer that's free that has some iRest practices, and those are about 45 minutes or longer, in which you have plenty of time to work with those emotions and thoughts. So then the next step of the practice is to experience joy. And this is another really key aspect of the iRest practice, because we want to feel how joy is an innate sense. Doing the work that you all do and being in this world in which we live right now, joy can be kind of hard to access. And it can feel fleeting, and it can feel, just difficult to find. So through iRest, we experience this felt sense of joy that is beyond condition. And that innate joy allows you to feel the beauty of life and of your being just as you are. And so we'll feel that experience of joy exactly as it is in you. So then the next step is this fine lasting peace. So one distinction in iRest is this idea of being, or awareness, as we call it in iRest. And so through this practice, the goal is that as you get deeper and deeper and deeper into this felt sense in your body, and you experience these emotions, these thoughts, you experience joy, you eventually drop into the deepest part of yourself. And what we call that in iRest is awareness. And so it's really a felt sense experience. As you drop deeper into that place of awareness, the idea is that you feel this total openness. And in that, we feel connection with each other, connection with ourselves, connection with the world. We can feel this ground of being that isn't doing, that isn't judging, that isn't accomplishing, but is just this deep and lasting peace. But that comes, it comes in time, and it comes when you get really deep in the practice. So it's just a little flavor of it here and there that you can start to hold on to, and then remember that, I felt that before, so I know I can feel it again. And then our final step in the 10-step protocol is to reflect. And this, of course, is very important because anything that you do, any practice that you do, when you can reflect back on it, it's like it creates a little divot in your brain. And so you remember it and you can return to it. And then it's like growing a muscle. Every time you do it, you get deeper in that little divot in your brain so that you basically get, better at it, or at least, if we could put it this way, you become more attuned to it. So then you can attune to that feeling of deep and lasting peace, even when you're just out in your daily life doing your normal tasks. So the reflect piece is really important because it allows you, again, to move back through that part in your brain that's like, all right, I know what I did. I know how I felt afterwards, and I know I can find this again. Okay. So then our next one is to focus on the inner resource. So as I was saying, when we went through this in the 10-step protocol, for me, this is the most important part of the practice. And this is what I hope stays with you when you leave here this evening. I'll go through this in the practice, so don't worry too much about, reading all of these words right now. But the basic idea is that if you can tap into a feeling in your body of any kind of safety or security or groundedness or enoughness, if you can tap into that felt experience in your body, then you can always go back there. You can keep dropping back there as many times as you need to in this practice, out in your life, every time you meditate. That becomes like gaining strength and building a muscle to always go back to. And for me, in doing this work, in teaching and leading iRest, my hope is that we can meet children, really young children, and then especially like middle and high schoolers who could really benefit from learning a skill like this at such a young age. If you can tap into that feeling when you're like 6, 7, 8, then that just becomes what you remember as you grow up. And even as you experience all the difficulties of life that inevitably will arise, you can remember, I know I'm safe in my own body. I'm secure with myself. I have that with me always. And I think that's really the most powerful tool that iRest can give. So this might be something that you return to, and you write notes to yourself about how does it feel when I feel safe with myself? What are the sensations that I find? What are moments that make me feel safe with myself? Just to keep remembering that feeling and growing that muscle. So then something that Chaplain Cole and I had spoken about that she suggested that I thought was brilliant was something for y'all to take away, to keep, practicing the practice. And this is a tool I used when I was early on in my iRest journey, which was to set a timer. And if you, have your phone with you when you're doing your work day, or even if you just have like a little egg timer, set it for 30 minutes, an hour, could be every 3 hours. The time itself doesn't actually matter, but the intention is when that timer goes off, you stop what you're doing just for a moment and you check in with yourself. And you ask these 3 questions: where and how am I in space? So you pause and you check in with that. Where am I? How do I feel? And you notice that without any judgment or attachment. It's just an observation. And then the second is you practice feeling your inner resource. You practice dropping into that place in your body where you feel secure, where you feel at ease, where you feel grounded. And you just take a moment there and feel it. And then the third one is just to have a reminder to yourself. It can be one of these phrases: I am safe with myself. I am at peace. I am whole. Again, any language or words that work for you is great. And if it's not words, that's great too. It's just any kind of reminder that allows you to basically reflect in a short time on this practice. And then repeat that throughout your day as many times as the timer works for you. And these are just some gentle reminders. So I know that when I started meditating, it was really difficult for me to always do it in the right way. So I want you guys to know that meditation does not calm the waves. It teaches you to surf. That means you're not going to be able to shut your brain off entirely when you start this practice. Your brain's still going to do what it does, which is think. That's its job. But the idea is that through this practice, you learn how to surf those waves without getting overwhelmed. One of the key things about the iRest practice, there's nothing to fix. There is nothing to change. However you are in this moment, even if you're experiencing anger or frustration or something that maybe you don't want to feel, we're not trying to fix that. We're not trying to get rid of it. We're just noticing it and welcoming it fully to see how it feels to be with that. And then the key to this practice is it can be done anytime, anywhere, by anybody. Just those 3 gentle questions that we saw on the last slide, those can help you tap back into the practice. Most importantly is be easy on yourself and give yourself compassion. It's a tool and it's a skill. So time and time again, if you're just showing up even for 5 minutes a day, maybe 10 minutes a day, that cumulative benefit will add up and you will feel the amazing results. But it's okay if it takes time, and it's okay if it doesn't quite click today. Take what works for you and leave what doesn't. The final thing is just to reach out if you have any questions, if you want to learn anything more about iRest. This is my email address. You can write it down. Anytime I'm here, I'd love to talk more about this practice and or set up a time to lead it. And thank you so much for your time and attention, because this practice is so important to me and I love sharing it. It's an honor to share it. So thank you. I'm going to stop the presentation and we'll go into the practice. So give yourself a moment now. We've just got about 8 minutes. So it'll be a little quicker, but again, anything is worth doing. You can keep your screen on or you can turn your video off. It's whatever feels comfortable for you. If you'd like, and if it feels safe to do so, you can close your eyes. So just take a moment now to notice how you feel. Notice the felt sense of your body and the gentle rise and fall of your breath. As we move into the practice of iRest, you're simply meeting, greeting, and welcoming what arises just as it is. There's nothing to fix, there's nothing to change. So now allow your heart's deepest desire to arise. You may find words, or it may just be a felt sense. This feeling that you want most in life, how you want to live this life. And see if you can feel your heart's deepest desire as though it's already so. As if it's true in this moment. Finding it in your body as a felt sense. From this heartfelt desire, allow an intention to arise for this particular practice of iRest. The intention could simply be curiosity or openness. And again, there may not be words, so welcome your experience fully just as it is. Let this intention ground you here in where you are and what you are doing. From here, we'll feel into the inner resource. This is an inner safe haven in your body where you feel secure, relaxed, and at ease. it's helpful, you can recall a memory or think of a time in your life in which you felt safe, secure, enough. And now notice where and how you feel this in your body. Allow yourself to drop into that felt sense. And then let the images or memories fade, but continue to welcome this feeling of equanimity and ease, grounded stability in your own body. And now affirm to yourself that this is always with you. You can return to your inner resource at any time. If it feels right, you could even imagine like you're planting a little flag here in this place in your body. So then whenever you need to, you can remember this flag, drop back down, feel that inner ground, the safety, the security, the well-being and ease. Then you can come back into whatever is arising and meet it, greet it, and welcome it just as it is, knowing you have the tools to be with each moment fully. And take a moment now to note what is arising in you. The sensations of your body, the gentle rhythm of your breath. Note how you are the observer of all of these movements. Feel yourself as the open spaciousness in which everything arises. Let everything else melt away and feel yourself simply being present, open, just as you are. Now, before we move out of this practice back into the rest of the evening, just take a moment to reflect back your experience of these last few minutes, just being with yourself, the felt sense of that inner resource. Remind yourself that this is always with you. And let your attention come back to the breath. Let your attention come back to the physical body. Before you move out of this practice, just welcome gratitude to yourself. Grateful for taking this time just to be, to feel, to allow whatever arising. And as you're ready, you can gently open your eyes and come back. And thank you all for sharing that practice with me. I know it was short, but hopefully you can find some resources. And again, you've got my email address, so feel free to email me anytime, any questions. And thank you so much, Chaplain Cole, for all of your help in getting this set up. And y'all stick around for the real deal tonight. Thank you.
Let's give it up for Annie, also the real deal. So thank you so much, Annie, for sharing that practice. And I know for one, I am feeling much more grounded and open and really like primed to hear the wonderful knowledge Chaplain Cole is going to share with us this evening. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Amelia H. Wheeler. I'm one of the co-facilitators of Teach the Truth Thursdays, and I am just so honored and excited to introduce my fellow co-facilitator, the one and only Chaplain Cole Napper. And so I want to tell you a little bit about Chaplain Cole. So Chaplain Cole is a native of Athens, Georgia, and Chaplain Cole Napper is truly an intersectional 21st century civil rights activist. She's an African-American, gender nonconforming woman, a Southerner who is a Spelman College graduate, and she'll not let you forget this, a classmate of Stacey Abrams. Yeah. Chaplain Cole holds 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 master's degrees in technology, media, and education. And 2 of these are from Ivy League schools. She's also a war veteran and has served in 4 tours of duty in support of our operations in Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan. We welcome her and her message this evening, her vision, her spirit. It has been a gift just to work with her on this project, and I'm really excited for y'all to hear what she has to teach us this evening. So please welcome Chaplain Cole Napper to Teach the Truth Thursdays.
Okay, so can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up. Fantastic. All right. So thank you, Amelia, for that awesome introduction. And thank you so much, Annie Markham, for being an awesome AADM volunteer. Just amazing. So my name is Chaplain Cole Napper, and I'm going to be your facilitator for tonight's conversation, How Red Lines Built White Wealth. And we're just going to start with our agenda tonight. We're going to discuss some of the basic considerations of how we as educators individually and collectively can lead our classrooms with dignity and grace, giving the utmost respect to each of our students. And since we talk about joy so often, and Black joy in particular, during this series of classes, I thought we'd start off with a little bit of fun music.
Technical difficulties, y'all are used to those by now. We're going to get this slide shared in just a moment.
And okay, let's try this again.
There we go.
black, 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 I'm black, my skin is so black, I'm rocking that black on black is black. Rims on this black, wheels in this black, black with this black, bitch. Black on black on black on black on black on black, 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 black on black, black, my skin so black, 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 I'm black, my skin is so black, I'm rocking all black, everything is black. Rims on this black, wheels in this black, black with this black on black, 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 hey. Black out the cool, how about the move when I run into you? Dark black to the dark side of the moon. Want me no truth, want me no truth. Get a row with an all black suit. Couple white girls looking all black suits. Go bring your man Mark in an all black suit. Call up the truth, call up the truth. Punch you in the mouth there, knock out your tooth. I can tell when they not telling the truth. Talking that shit, nigga, what you gon' do? What you gon' do? What you gon' do? Back and I'm black and I'm acting brand new. Niggas in the back like, oh word. Diamonds all black like, fuck what you heard. Fuck what you heard. Fuck what you heard. Spilling some Hennessy black on the curb. Just for the memory of the deceased. When I black out, I'm making the beats. What it's gonna be? What it's gonna be? You don't want fuck with a nigga like me. But you never seen motherfucker so black. Nigga, I'm black on black on black on black on black. Black, black, black on black. Black, my face so black. Black, black, I'm black. My skin is so black. I'm rocking that black on black is black. Rims on this black. Wheels in this black. Black with this black. Bitch, black on black on black on black on black on black. Black, black, black on black. Black, my face so black. Black, black, I'm black. My skin is so black. I'm rocking all black. Everything is black. Rims on this black. Wheels in this black. Black with this black. Bitch, black, 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 black. I like Trayvon with this black hoodie on. So on black revolution. I'm with a doobie on. And then just I got a black bitch barred up and then just
Okay.
400 years of oppression. I'm about to give me that black Tesla. Black skid marks on the pavement. Cops want to see me.
Wait, how do I stop? I know how to stop. I mean, like, how do I cut the song off, sort of thing?
So just click on the.
It's okay. I mean, it's a good song. How do I stop right in the middle of a good song? Yeah, yeah, that's, yeah. Okay. Okay. I'll get us to the next slide.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you all for like putting up with our technical difficulties. It wouldn't be a class that I taught without them. So thanks for your good energy. All right, so this is our agenda for the night. We are going to be basically talking about the Zen Education Project lesson, How Red Lines Built White Wealth. And this is a class that's based on Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law. And so we're going to watch Segregated by Design, which is a 17-minute animated film. It's an award-winning film, and I promise you, you will be blown away by it. And then what we're going to do is identify 7 key takeaways from The Color of Law. And I'll be asking you, each of the audience members, to imagine how these key takeaways apply to you and your life as an educator or whatever it is that you do. So before we begin, if you do have questions along the way, we have some awesome Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement interns who are here. So we have Courtney and Sam and Natalie and Sierra, and also my co-facilitator Amelia are going to be monitoring the chat. So feel free to use it. And I'm not going to keep my chat window up, but they will. So if you have a question that comes in, just put it in the chat and they'll let me know. Awesome. Thank you. I got nothing but love here tonight, and I'm super excited. All right. So first, let's get started by, given that November is Native American Indian Heritage Month, we would be remiss if we didn't take a moment for a land acknowledgement. So in Georgia, our land acknowledgement goes to the historic peoples of the Muskogee, Timucua, and Seminole tribes, both past and present, and an appreciation for the fact that we are on occupied land. We honor with the deepest of gratitude the land itself. If you have any questions about this, there's a great website here called Native Land Digital where you can find out more information. And I'll be providing a copy of these slides to AADM, which has all of my contact information. So if there's anything that you'd like to follow up on about today's presentation, you'll have it. So again, my name is Chaplain Cole Napper, and I use any pronouns. I identify as BIPOC, and that means Black, Indigenous, Person of Color. My identity very much informs a lot of my work and my positionality on issues. So of course, as a teacher, that's what you're going to get from me tonight. Some of the most important things about me are that I am born and raised in Athens, Georgia. And I've spent my entire life trying to get my hometown of Athens to be proud of me. But the very best thing about my life, through the highs and lows, is that my education has made all the difference. You see, I come from 2 retired Clark County School District educators right here in Athens, Georgia, where there's an old saying that if you can change Athens, Georgia, you can change the world. Well, I lived in New York City and I was a student at Columbia University, and I was privileged enough to be able to teach in some of Manhattan's finest and most elite private schools. But after I graduated with my Ivy League education, I wanted to go and teach in the real world. I didn't want to teach in some private school, no offense, love private schools. They taught me everything I know, but I wanted to teach where I knew students needed me. So I chose to teach public high school up in the Bronx. And when I tell you that after years of spending time teaching in public school or private schools, to go to a public school and to see the shocking lack of resources, it was just enraging, shocking, and it broke my heart. And what I discovered is just how far behind Black people have been left, because this country has never made its promises to us. It is unconstitutional and wrong. For generations, Black Athenians have been told by our parents that once we graduate from high school here in Athens, we got to get out of town, that there is nothing here for us other than death, poverty, and or prison. But I got to thinking here in the past year, since the lynchings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Rayshard Brooks and Ahmaud Arbery, why is it that our life outcomes are so different than our white neighbors? And it's because of the ways that we are segregated. And if this country is to move forward to be the very best version of America it can be, we must unify. The best way to do this is by insisting upon a truthful and inclusive telling of our history. Well, tonight, I call on our ancestors right here in the state of Georgia to stop the violence against Black and brown bodies in this country and the backlash against Black progress. The key takeaway I want you to know about me is that I've spent my entire life trying to improve Athens, Georgia by making Athens, Georgia proud of me. I am honored to serve as the Veterans Affairs Chair for the Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network. Founded in 1991 by Reverend Al Sharpton, National Action Network is one of the leading civil rights organizations in the nation, with chapters throughout the entire United States. But I am also a post 9/11 United States Army veteran who served over a decade on active duty, both as an enlisted soldier and a commissioned officer. And during my career, I deployed on those 4 separate tours of duty to support operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. So tonight, I am standing here as a proud product of Spelman College, but also with all of this knowledge that I've been given, and I do not take it lightly. I proudly hold 3 master's degrees in education, 2 of them from the Ivy League, but I graduated from Clark Central High School, same as our governor, by the way, who's also from Athens, Georgia. But even though I took advanced placement American history at Clark Central High School, I learned nothing of Lenintown or Juneteenth. Instead, I learned that war is always good for business and that slavery was not the harsh, cruel, immoral, and dehumanizing act that we know that it is. No, instead, I learned and was taught that slavery was a peculiar institution and a necessary evil. Tonight, I am here to challenge all of that. And I call on all educators across this nation to do the same. You see, because while some white people keep on hitting the lottery and failing upwards in terms of their wealth and opportunities that easily await them and their children, Black families like mine are losing property and wealth in ways that in the age of COVID-19 and the opioid epidemic are truly genocidal. So even though my African-American parents are first-generation college graduates with multiple advanced degrees from the University of Georgia, for some reason, we are a generation of Black Georgians who are doing worse financially than our parents did with theirs. We have stacks of degrees, but not stacks of paper. So here we are in 2021, left to ask again, how can things be so different for white families in Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, Louisiana, Florida, than they are for Black families? Well, tonight I want to try to shed a whole lot of sunlight on that question, but I want you to come with me, because this isn't just about Black and white, but it is about understanding why we look at the world in terms of Black and white. It was intentional. And that means that if it can be taught, then it can be untaught. It is utterly heartbreaking that after all my years of service in foreign countries, I have to be back in my own country as a Black American untouchable in 2021, experiencing the same racism and hatred by my neighbors who I was sworn to protect and defend. Freedom ain't free, y'all. Every generation must fight for it. And that brings us to why we are here tonight. Just a few months ago, on August 27th, 2021, educational leadership doctoral student activist Amelia H. Wheeler got together with the founder and executive director of the Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement, Mocha Jasmine Johnson, and joined the nationwide Zen Education Project as they invited educators across the country to pledge to teach the truth in our nation's classrooms. Now, that Pledge to Teach the Truth rally was held here in Athens on the University of Georgia campus, on the site of land stolen from Black Athenians like Hattie Whitehead. That rally helped spark an 8-week series of educational classes devoted to supporting Georgia K through 16 educators in teaching the truth in their classrooms as a necessary step towards saving our democracy. Now, Amelia H. Wheeler is an up-and-coming force to be reckoned with. She is a white woman from Forsyth County, Georgia, who is using her voice and her privilege to speak up and speak out about the racism and white supremacy that still haunts this area. I am proud to stand with her, with Mocha Jasmine Johnson, and with Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement as we demand a better, brighter, more equitable, and just future for this country. Mocha Jasmine Johnson invited Amelia and I to imagine a world where Georgia leads the nation in teaching teachers how to teach in new ways, in transformative ways. Georgia has a chance to lead this country in the peaceful, nonviolent battle for the soul of this nation. And education, truthful, shared, painful history will lead us out of the darkness and disunity and into the light and beauty of this nation's future. So at this time, we're going to watch Richard Rothstein's award-winning short documentary, Segregated by Design, based on the book, The Color of Law. And as you watch, please take note of what you feel are some of the key takeaways from this documentary, and we'll discuss them on the other side. And then when it opens, can you expand it?
Mhm.
In the middle of the 20th century, the city of St. Louis, Missouri, and the United States federal government condemned and demolished the neighborhoods of downtown St. Louis where African Americans lived, displacing thousands. They built Gateway Arch. They built a university, interstate highways, hospitals, and middle-class housing that was unaffordable to former African American residents. Those who were displaced and relocated to the few other places available, converting inner-ring suburbs like Ferguson into new segregated enclaves.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all.
We have been led to believe that racial segregation in housing was de facto segregation,
by accident or the result of private prejudices. Yes, private prejudice clearly contributed to segregation, but by itself it could not have segregated the country without the intention of the federal government to segregate neighborhoods throughout the nation. If, however, we understand the accurate history, the history that was once well known, but we've all now forgotten, that racially segregated patterns in every metropolitan area like St. Louis were created by de jure segregation, racially explicit policy on the part of federal, state, and local governments designed to segregate metropolitan areas, then we can understand that we have an unconstitutional residential landscape. And if it's unconstitutional, then we have an obligation to remedy it. The federal government in the New Deal of the Roosevelt administration of the 1930s pursued policies in the mid-20th century that segregated metropolitan areas. One important policy was the first civilian public housing program, which frequently demolished integrated neighborhoods in order to create segregated public housing. In the late 1930s, another New Deal program, the United States Housing Authority, was adopted. The very first projects built under the United States Housing Authority authorization were in Austin, Texas, because the most aggressive proponent of public housing at that time was the congressman from Austin, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And Johnson got the United States Housing Authority to put its first projects in Austin, separate projects for whites, for African Americans, and the project for Hispanics. The project for African Americans was placed in a location that the city plan of Austin had designated as a ghetto for African Americans. The United States Housing Authority and the local Austin Housing Authority demolished something called Emancipation Park, which was a celebrations location for the abolition of slavery. The design was to move all African Americans in the city of Austin into this community, whether in public housing or in private housing. The city of Austin then began to close schools for African Americans elsewhere in the city, to close libraries and other public facilities, and force African Americans to move to the east side. Another program that the federal government pursued to enforce segregation was the work of the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, which subsidized the development of suburbs like Levittown, New York, on condition that they only be sold to white families and that the homes in those suburbs had deeds that prohibited resale to African Americans. The Federal Housing Administration's underwriting manual said that inharmonious racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities. Loans to African Americans could not be insured. Government at all levels throughout the nation were involved in promoting and enforcing the restrictive deeds in homes and places like Levittown, and judges enforced the view that these deeds did not violate the Constitution because they were private agreements. Although white middle-class families that moved into suburbs like Levittown could buy property with no down payments if they were veterans and low-interest mortgages, middle-class African Americans had to make substantial down payments and get uninsured mortgages with higher interest rates. In many, if not most cases, African Americans could not get mortgages at all because the federal government would not insure them. As a result, they bought their homes on contract, like an installment plan where they accumulated no equity and could be evicted from their homes in the event of a single missed payment. Thus, contract buyers do not have the option of leaving a declining neighborhood before their properties were paid for in full. If they did, they would lose everything they invested in that property to date. The term redlining comes from the federal government's creation of maps of urban areas nationwide. And those maps were color-coded to indicate where it was safe to insure mortgages. Anywhere African Americans lived, even places where African Americans lived nearby, were colored red to indicate to appraisers that these neighborhoods were too risky for the FHA to insure. The FHA's justification was that if African Americans bought homes in white neighborhoods, or even if they bought homes near those neighborhoods, the property values of the homes they were insuring, the white homes they were insuring, would decline, and therefore their loans would be at risk. In 1940, for example, a Detroit builder was denied FHA insurance for a project that was near an African American neighborhood. He then constructed a half-mile concrete wall, 6 feet high and a foot thick, separating the two neighborhoods, and then the FHA approved the loan. In the 3 decades during which it administered this policy, however, The agency never provided or obtained evidence to support its claim that integration undermined property values. In fact, often racial integration caused property values to increase because African Americans' housing supply was so restricted and they had so many fewer choices. If African Americans had access to housing throughout metropolitan areas, supply and demand balances would have kept their rents and home prices at reasonable levels. Without access, landlords and sellers were free to take advantage of the greater demand relative to supply for African American housing. A 1946 National Magazine article described a Chicago building where the landlord had divided a 540 square foot storefront into 6 cubicles, each housing a family. He had similarly subdivided the second story. Total monthly rent was as great as that generated by a luxury apartment on Chicago's Gold Coast along Lake Michigan. Such exploitation was possible only because public policy denied African Americans opportunities to participate in the city's white housing market. As the federal government concentrated low-income African Americans in single neighborhoods, the homes became overcrowded. Families had to subdivide their homes to make their mortgage payments and their property tax payments. Cities frequently withdrew public services from African American neighborhoods. They collected garbage less frequently. They didn't provide water and sewer services. Polluting industry and toxic waste plants were placed in African American communities in order to protect white neighborhoods from deterioration. The result was that African American neighborhoods frequently turned into slums. White homeowners looked at these places and assumed the slum conditions were characteristics of African Americans, not of government policy that forced this kind of overcrowding. White homeowners then became resistant to African Americans moving into their neighborhoods because they thought they would bring slum conditions with them. Of course, the slums were not created by the people. They were created by the forced concentration, the overcrowding in these neighborhoods. Blockbusting was a scheme in which speculators bought properties in borderline black-white areas, rented or sold them to African American families at above market prices, persuaded white families residing in these areas that their neighborhoods were turning into African American slums and that values would soon fall precipitously, and then purchased the panicked white homes for less than their worth. Blockbusters' tactics included hiring African American women to push carriages with their babies through white neighborhoods, hiring African American men to drive cars with radios blasting through white neighborhoods, or making random telephone calls to residents of white neighborhoods and asking to speak to someone with a stereotypically African American name, like Johnny May. State licensing agencies that regulated real estate agents could have easily stopped this practice. All they had to do was to lift the license of 1 or 2 real estate agents who engaged in these practices, and the practices would have ended. While many de jure segregation policies aim to keep African Americans far from white residential areas, public officials also shifted African American populations away from downtown business districts so that white commuters, shoppers, and business elites would not be exposed to black people. This was accomplished with slum clearance. One slum clearance tool was the construction of the federal interstate highway system. In many cases, state and local governments, with federal acquiescence, designed interstate highway routes to destroy urban African American communities. In the 1950s, there was a white middle-class neighborhood in Los Angeles that wealthy African Americans began to move into. It was called Sugar Hill. The first thing that happened was that the neighborhood association got together and tried to buy out the African American families who were moving in, offering them more money than the African Americans had paid in order to get them out of the neighborhood. When that didn't work, white homeowners tried to enforce a legal agreement prohibiting them from living in the neighborhood. And when that didn't work, the city council then decided it would be an African American neighborhood. It rezoned it for multiple family housing. It eventually became a slum. And then the Santa Monica Freeway was built to clear that slum to destroy the neighborhood. So these policies all worked together in an unconstitutional fashion to segregate Los Angeles. In 1957, Bill and Daisy Myers were able to purchase a home in Levittown, Pennsylvania, the Levitt Company's second large development. When the mail carrier discovered that he was delivering mail to an African American family, he let everyone in the neighborhood know, and as many as 600 white demonstrators soon showed up in front of the Myers' house. pelting the family in their home with rocks. Law enforcement stood by as this happened. For 2 months, rocks were thrown, crosses were burned, the Ku Klux Klan symbol was painted on the wall next door. Some policemen stood with the mob, joking and encouraging its participants. One sergeant was actually demoted to patrolman because he objected to orders he had been given not to interfere with the rioters. In 1951, World War II veteran Harvey Clark, his wife Janetta, and 2 small children rented an apartment in Old White Cicero, a suburb of Chicago. When the Clarks refused to leave, a mob of 4,000 rioted, raiding the apartment, destroying the fixtures, and throwing the family's belongings out the window onto the lawn where they were set ablaze. Time magazine reported that the police officers present, quote, acted like ushers, politely handling the overflow in a football stadium, unquote. The only people that the grand jury indicted were Harvey Clark, his real estate agent, his NAACP attorney, and the white landlady who rented the apartment to him, as well as her attorney, on charges of inciting a riot and conspiring to lower property values. Stories like this were commonplace, and state-sponsored violence was a means, along with many others, by which all levels of government maintained segregation. Today, African American incomes are about 60% of white incomes. But African American wealth is about 10% of white wealth. Most middle-class families in this country gain their wealth from the equity they have in their homes. So this enormous difference between a 60% income ratio and a 10% wealth ratio is almost entirely attributable to federal housing policy implemented through the 20th century. African American families that were prohibited from buying homes in the suburbs in the 1940s and 50s, and even into the 60s by the Federal Housing Administration, gained none of the equity appreciation that whites gained. Across the country in new developments, these homes in the late 1940s and 1950s sold for about twice national median income. They were affordable to working class families with an FHA or VA mortgage. African Americans were equally able to afford those homes as whites, but were prohibited from buying them. Today, those homes sell for $300,000 to $400,000 at the minimum, 6 to 8 times national median income. The white families sent their children to college with the wealth they gained from appreciating home equity. They were able to take care of their parents in old age and not depend on their children. They were able to bequeath wealth to their children. None of those advantages were due to African Americans, who for the most part were prohibited from buying homes in the suburbs. So in 1968, we passed the Fair Housing Act that said, in effect, okay, African Americans, you're now free to buy homes in the suburbs that had been forbidden. But it's an empty promise, because those homes are no longer affordable to the families whose parents or grandparents could have afforded them when whites were buying into those suburbs and gaining the equity and wealth that followed from their purchases. Consider children who come from families where they're economically stressed, or in poor health because they have no access to good health care, or because they live in polluted environments. When they do come to school, for example, they may suffer from asthma because of that pollution and are drowsy from being awake at night, wheezing. They cannot then typically achieve at levels of children who come to school well rested. When you concentrate children like that in single classrooms, it's impossible for teachers to develop the kind of outcomes that they can in middle-class children who come to school healthy, unstressed, and able to pay attention to schooling. What economists know is that African American children from low-income families who grow up in segregated neighborhoods are less likely as adults to move into the middle class than are African American children whose families have the same low incomes but who live in integrated neighborhoods. So segregation itself impedes intergenerational mobility and perpetuates, rigidifies the inequality that we experience. Another thing that social psychologists have discovered is that decision-making is hampered when you don't have diverse decision-making groups. These psychologists have done experiments where they put people together to solve problems in both diverse groups and in segregated groups. And the diverse groups are much better able to solve problems because they challenge assumptions much more than the segregated groups do. So segregation impedes our political and economic success. We have three provisions in the federal constitution that prohibit the kinds of actions that federal, state, and local governments pursue to create residential segregation. One is the Fifth Amendment, which requires the federal government to treat all citizens fairly. Another is the 14th Amendment that requires state and local governments not only to treat citizens fairly, but to treat them equally. And then the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, also requires that we banish the effects of slavery, which Congress long ago determined was any form of second-class citizenship. So in fact, the prohibition on African Americans to purchase homes in federally subsidized white communities with segregation of public housing created a form of second-class citizenship, which was a violation of the 13th Amendment. We cannot reverse de jure segregation mainly with lawsuits. We must also build a national political consensus leading to legislation, a challenging but not impossible task. Our focus now should be to develop policies that promote an integrated society. Understanding it will be impossible to fully untangle the web of unconstitutional inequality that we've woven. To begin, we should first contemplate what we have collectively done and, on behalf of our government, accept responsibility to fix it.
Right? Woo. So we'll just go to the next slide.
Um, huh? Yeah.
All right, so thank you. Wow, so I just love that video. I think it was so well done and incredibly useful to a lot of groups that I've worked with. So I hope that you all found it equally useful. And I ask that you think about some of the takeaways that you had from this documentary. So I'm just going to start with the very first one. And then if you have some that you came up with, if you'd like to share, if you're here, you can share. If you're on the Zoom, you can either raise your hand or type it in the chat, and we'll address it. So the first takeaway that I took was that, I mean, the key argument behind Rothstein's book is that because racial segregation practices were directly in violation of the 14th Amendment, they require a constitutional remedy, right? So if there's a violation of the Constitution, and it is a violation of the 14th Amendment, then what is required is a constitutional remedy. So as you can see in the 14th Amendment, the language says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now, the practices that followed for the next 100 years and beyond were clearly in direct violation of this amendment. And the Supreme Court ruled several times that this was what was happening. But yet you still have states and municipalities, along with the federal government, that continued these practices. And because of that, it is the responsibility of the federal government to right the wrongs that they intentionally perpetuated that led to nationwide segregation and a vast and insurmountable wealth and achievement gap between Black and white Americans. You look at the practices on the next slide, please. The next key takeaway that I got was that the historic racial segregation did not just naturally happen. It was codified into law on the local, state, and the federal level in both public and private housing. I never knew that. Did anybody here ever know about any of that? And a common narrative today is that people actually want to be segregated, and they do so naturally. But this simply isn't true. And we know that because it's evidenced by the huge number of Black people who were willing to risk their lives and their families' lives just in order to move into a mostly white neighborhood so that they could have better access to jobs and better schools. Successful integrated neighborhoods have existed all across the country, but where they existed, the federal government, the local government, and state governments worked to systematically dismantle them. And so what's great about The Color of Law is that Rothstein provides numerous examples of the demolition of integrated neighborhoods for whites-only developments that directly caused the creation of urban ghettos, not just in the South, but in places like Detroit, Indianapolis, Toledo, and New York, just to name a few. This was nationwide. And so when the PWA, the Public Works Administration, was replaced by the United States Housing Authority back in 1937, these policies still remained. And time again, attempts to build integrated housing developments, whether they were public or private, were rejected, full stop, by state and local governments. But also, land that was sold for a development for whites was condemned to be turned into a park as soon as any Black person was meant to live there. Many private housing developments were abandoned due to the costs incurred by endless bureaucratic hoops and red tape. And in 1955, after members of the United Auto Workers Union voted to build integrated housing for Ford employees in Santa Clara County, the builders were rejected by lenders, rezoned by the local government in order to increase the minimum land plot size, which was a common tactic back then. Then they had the approvals rescinded and were denied access to things like sewer lines. So anything that you can imagine, they could think of to derail the project. So when the development was finally built, it was prohibitively expensive for the Black workers and the city residents. And to this day, their population of Black people is just 2%. So in what integrated public housing, in where integrated public housing did exist, eventually most of the white families built up enough wealth to move out, or they were incentivized to move into whites-only public housing. But the final nail in the coffin of public housing was creating income ceilings for its residents. This is something that forced all middle-class families, whether Black or white, to move out of any public housing projects beginning in the 1950s. This concentrated poverty, ensuring insufficient maintenance budgets and solidifying the high-rise developments as the crime-ridden, poverty-stricken ghettos that we know today. All right, so I've gone over 2 key takeaways that I have. Before I go to the other 4, I just want to ask around the room about key takeaways. Does anyone have any key takeaways that they want to share with us? It's a lot of information, but I know that everyone comes to this from a different place and a different space, and we'd really love to hear from anyone who wants to share. Absolutely. So we have someone here locally who wants to say something. Helene, go ahead.
Hi. I think one of the takeaways that I came away with was it takes an enormous amount of complicity to put those laws into effect and to have kept them that way for such a long time, for decades upon decades. So that is something that we, if we're going to address that and change that in the future, it's an enormous weight we're up against. It's not impossible, but there has been so much complicity in enforcing, establishing and enforcing the laws to make it unequal that it's going to take quite a fight.
Absolutely. Yes.
painfully so, painfully so. Do you have any ideas as to how that might happen?
I think at this point in time, there's so much more opportunity for advocacy and for opening people's eyes. And information that you're sharing tonight is, I think, pivotal, because there are so many people who were so unaware. I mean, I grew up in Levittown. All right. I was tiny at the time. It was post World War II. And I was there from, I guess, from the early 50s up until we left in 1960. And I never knew up until a few years ago that redlining took place there, although I was aware of how white everything was. Never knew why.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I
actually took out the information about Levittown because it was just going to go, there's so much to say about Levittown. But for those of you who don't know, Levittown was an intentionally it was a huge housing program of single family homes in Long Island. They were all over, but in Long Island in particular, they had a huge one in New York, and they are known for, to this day, still having the segregationist language in their covenants, in their covenants that distinctly say that Black, these homes are not to be sold to Black people. And so you can still find that language in, for what I'm told, a lot of those homes that are still in that area for the families that are still there. So, okay, great. Anybody else?
But go ahead.
I was just going to add that all of this affects the schools as well. When you have these neighborhoods that are restricted and also poor, then you wind up with schools that are a minority and also poor. And people look at these two things and put them together. Like, oh, Black schools are this way because Black people are this way, when it's really poverty that we're looking at, but it's all concentrated. And the other thing that people do if they don't understand this history is, and this is especially people in a position of privilege, is they look at the slums and the way people live. Oh, well, they've obviously made poor choices. And I mean, it couldn't be farther from the truth, but without understanding, and this is, why we teach history, the truth about history, we have to know how we got here.
Amen.
And then we can fix it,
Right?
or try.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Beth Mendenhall. And I want to take a moment to thank all of the instructors that we've had. Beth was one of them. She taught the desegregation of Athens, Georgia schools a few weeks ago, and it was awesome. And so thank you to all of the people who have chosen to be instructors and pledge to teach the truth. I think it's really awesome, including Amelia.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few things that I'm thinking about. Like, number one, like as somebody pointed out, Helena, I believe, this was a clearly organized initiative, right? Like the federal government, the local governments, the state governments, stakeholders, like these people were incredibly intentional and they were incredibly calculatingly organized. And so when I think about what that means for us, it's that we need to be organized. That the only way systemic change is going to happen is if we are together. And so it reminds me of the importance of the work we're doing now and to continue. I think a second point to kind of echo Beth, a lot of us in the room are teachers. And, a big discourse that we hear is, well, we need to close the achievement gap. If we just teach them to the test a little bit better, if we just give them some more strategies. So first of all, we know the tests are crap. And second of all, by blaming students for their so-called inappropriate achievement, it's just shifting the narrative of the problem. No, the problem is this centuries-old racist segregation of resources, right? Or Beth says, or their parents, right? So I just think that another element of teaching the truth is taking this type of big kind of history that we're learning, and remember too, like in our very specific context, how that's manifesting. And so I feel like some takeaways for me is like in my own life is to kind of, you know, realize that most of the white people that I interact with, including how I grew up, sounds like maybe how Helena grew up too. Like we grew up in segregation and frankly ignorance, and we were dehumanized and we were lied to by being taught these horrible corrosive lies about why the world is the way it is, and it made us into people who couldn't feel and connect. So I just feel like I know that this is important knowledge to share for everyone in this country, because this is what we all need. Like clearly the video said, integration is better. Like our economy is being drained and messed up from these resources being spent on segregating the American citizens. So anyways, I'm kind of on a tangent, but just to say, we got to organize, we got to think about what this means for schools. And especially like me as a white woman, and I think the other white folks in the room, like it's, you know, on us to talk to white folks about this and really bring this into the conversation of like, no, you got skin in this game. And it's like, come on, like wake up. And guess what? Thanksgiving's just around the corner. So.
Oh, Amelia, that was awesome. That was so well put, as only you can, you know, speak. You speak so eloquently and passionately, and I'm so thankful to you for your voice here in this area. Like I said, she is a powerful, powerful advocate, and thank you for your words. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Helene. Okay, so when we talk about, you know, additional takeaways, that things that really resonated with me, you know, the third takeaway that I have is that the federal government made Black home ownership nearly impossible. Okay, and so I just want to take a quick moment to talk about that. Now, the New Deal created programs both to save existing homeowners who couldn't make their payments, and as well as to help new homeowners to achieve their dream of home ownership. Before the Homeowners Loan Corporation was created by the federal government in 1933, followed by the FHA in 1934, home ownership was both difficult and rare. Banks often required down payments of 50%, and homeowners didn't accumulate equity in their homes until the entire loan was paid off. But the FHA came in and changed all that. And they did it with low interest, low down payment, 25-year mortgages that allowed borrowers to build equity with every payment. Now, in the national housing shortage caused after the First World War, the federal government began building public housing en masse and launched campaigns encouraging white families to move to the newly built suburbs and purchase these homes. The FHA then insured those mortgages to allow banks to issue more loans, but only if they had a low risk of default. That risk assessment included a whites only requirement because Black or racially mixed neighborhoods had what were called uncertain property values. And again, the most important thing that I want you to remember from this class is that these rules were not unspoken. They were explicitly written, codified, and enforced in the underwriting manual published by the FHA. So even if a neighborhood had a risk of becoming integrated in the future, it was marked as too dangerous to be backed by the federal government. That meant that middle-class Black families with good credit, even white people who might lease their homes to African Americans, were banned from receiving federally backed mortgages. So while there are public housing projects for Black families, they were limited. They weren't allowed access to federal mortgage programs. And so most families were forced to live 2 or 3 to a single home, as their options were both overpriced and in short supply. All the same time, housing for white people sat empty. As the housing shortage continued after World War II, more private developments received government funding in addition to public housing, creating the American suburbs as we know them, and financing these massive subdivisions and developments in post-war America on the condition that they were whites only. is where the FHA had its biggest impact in solidifying what is today this nationwide generational segregation. So let me go to another takeaway. Let's go to slide number 4, takeaway number 4. Takeaway number 4 is that police allowed white on black violence to continue unpunished. So in cases where a black family managed to move into an all white neighborhood or even bordering on one, the result was often violence. And that violence was allowed to continue often by the local police. Cross burnings, throwing rocks, firebombing, and any other type of intimidation tactics were used while the police stood by idly, unwilling to make arrests. And black families had a choice to either stand their ground against enormous pressure to leave or simply to go back where they came from. And if you go back to the Chicago race riots, from 1917 to 1921 in the suburbs of Chicago alone, there were 58 firebombings of black homes and 0 arrests. Now, the Chicago race riot of 1919 started when a black teenager swam too close to a whites-only beach and was stoned to death by a group of white boys. Police refused to arrest the white man who caused it, and according to History.com, a month later, 15 white and 23 black people had been killed, and more than 500 injured, and 1,000 black families had lost their homes when they were torched by rioters. Rothstein shares a number of painful stories from around the nation in the wake of the Great Migration northward for Black Americans fleeing the Jim Crow South. But the one thing that we learned the other night in Damaris Dunn's excellent class about Dr. Mary Frances Early, trailblazer at the University of Georgia, what we learned was that Dr. Mary Frances Early had her tires slashed when she was at the University of Georgia. Like, that is news I needed to know. Why don't we know that? Why don't we know about the violence that has been met, the violence that happened to Charlene Hunter Galt, the violence that was met with Hunter Holmes? We aren't told about the violence, and it is the violence that is most painful. So what each of these stories has in common is the willingness of the police to allow the white rioters to continue. There was a lack of arrests, indictments, or any consequences whatsoever for the perpetrators, and the blaming and arresting of the black residents for causing the riots or disturbing the peace in the first place. Now, white families who bought homes with the intention of selling or renting them to black friends were charged with stirring up racial conflict. And this violence continued into the 1980s and 1990s with a drastic uptick in the number of prosecuted crimes, illustrating that it's not that the crimes were increasing, but that by the time that the 80s and 90s rolled around, police were finally willing to prosecute the white people committing those crimes. If we have so many hundreds of stories, and there are hundreds of stories of black people enduring violence for trying to move into a better neighborhood, then Richard Rothstein opines how many thousands of others must have been intimidated enough never even to attempt to move in the first place. So I know that this brings up a lot for a lot of people. And so I'm just going to open it up to the audience to see if anybody has anything that they would like to comment on before I go to the last 2 key takeaways. And yeah, we can just leave it right here. These are just some images from Macon, Georgia that are on your screen. The redlining done in Macon, Georgia, the redlining done in Atlanta, the price difference for the exact same 4-bedroom and 3.5-bath house for a white family, the depreciation that happens when it is a black-owned home, even though it's the same home and ostensibly same neighborhood and taken care of in the same manner. And these are just images from things that I never had to see in my lifetime. So as someone who was born in 1971, just 3 years after Martin Luther King was assassinated, I never saw a bus stop for white people or a colored sign that said colored people should, use this water fountain or use the back or whatever. I never had to live through that. But I know that many of you who are listening have had to listen to that, have had to see those images. And I'm wondering if just anybody who's here, who maybe lived to see that type of segregation, can speak to what it was like as a child to ask your parents, Mommy, Daddy, why is the broken stuff and the dirty stuff always designated for Black people? It's always substandard. And the things that are designated for white people are always clean and pristine. Why is that? I can't imagine. And I'm so thankful for everyone who fought so that I didn't have to grow up that way. But there's some people who are trying to get us to go back to that. And so that's why we're here tonight. So does anybody have anything that they'd like to comment on? I'll open it up.
This is Barb. I did not, I don't have stories to share that you were asking about, Chaplain Cole, about living in segregation. Oops, sorry. Sorry about that. About living in segregation, but I was just thinking about white flight. And I'm not sure that that term was used in the documentary, but it certainly happened. And there were scare tactics. I remember they talked about having a Black woman with her stroller going through a neighborhood, or hearing music on a radio in a car. But what those words that I heard, intentional, complicit, deception, and all of these are examples of systematic racism and white supremacy. So, whenever anybody wonders and asks and says, I don't understand what that is, systematic racism, well, all of this is examples of that.
Amen. Exactly. And I think that, I don't know, honestly, I think that I have just learned and continue to learn what systematic racism is, right? Systemic versus systematic versus institutionalized, right? Like, there are a lot of different terms that I think are just new for people. And I want to leave space for that, and space here, particularly in this academic environment, for people to know that it's okay to say that you don't know. These are all new terms for all of us. And I think that we have to lean into that and embrace it. And so, okay. Anyone else? I'm just going to go ahead and knock out these last two takeaways that I thought were pretty important. Anybody else? Just want to make sure I don't have any hands raised. Okay, awesome. All right, so my key takeaway for number 5 was this idea that the wealth inequality between Black and white families is a direct result of federal policy and de jure segregation. So Richard Rothstein opens the 10th chapter of the book, Suppressed Incomes, by recounting the details of sharecropping and prison labor programs that led to the indentured servitude of hundreds of thousands of Black Americans, both during and after Reconstruction. In addition, he reviews numerous federally run and funded projects, many that are part of FDR's New Deal, which either explicitly excluded Black workers or which paid them illegally suppressed wages. Now, these include authorities like the Tennessee Valley Authority, the National Recovery Administration, and the Civilian Conservation Corps. And in any of the subsections of these programs that were predominantly Black wages, they were intentionally exempt from any mandated increases. right? So Black people weren't making any wages. And many of the programs simply refused to hire Black workers or kept them in the most menial positions, no matter their skill level. And as a person that works I don't work in the VA, but as a veteran, you know, I have to you can go to any VA across this country, and you will see that the top level leadership is all white. But then when you go to like custodial services, you got a Black guy with 3 master's degrees, or, you know, in food services, a woman with, you know, 3 master's degrees. And that is the type of generational pain that we have to continue seeing. But what Rothstein was talking about at this time was that unions were being formed that were not allowed to exclude not only allowed to exclude Black members, some unions forced businesses to fire Black workers and give those jobs to white workers. And this happened, and I haven't read it in any of my history books, right? So even as white workers were in short supply during World War II, unions fought the addition of Black workers, or they created auxiliary union chapters for Blacks only when they had no other choice. But even then, it was with the stipulation that they should never advance to supervising white people. So all of this stuff was allowed to take place by the Federal Oversight Committee for Unions. Anybody know? The National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. And it's because they couldn't unionize, they were kept in the lowest paying positions without any type of bargaining power or ability to get promoted. African Americans missed out on the biggest wage growth of the 20th century because of that. And even today, African Americans are still fighting for equal rights and wages in their unions, with multiple ongoing lawsuits against discrimination in the NLRB. So when the bubble burst, these families lost not just their homes, but decades of accumulated wealth and progress. In addition, having a previous foreclosure on their record makes it nearly impossible to qualify for a conventional mortgage going forward. But because the banks issuing these loans receive both approval and oversight from, you guessed it, federal regulatory agencies, what Richard Rothstein again contends is that this constitutes de jure segregation and is clearly discriminatory. Which brings us to takeaway number 6. Only aggressive policy changes can undo the legacy of segregation. De jure segregation has been illegal for more than 50 years. However, segregation remains rampant across the United States. And Richard Rothstein argues that it is going to take much more than simply making segregation illegal to undo the decades of policy decisions that created the segregated neighborhoods, the depressed wages of Black workers, the increased rents and fees and fines, the things that limited their disposable income, kept them out of the suburbs, and forced them into crowded, poorly maintained ghettos. Wealth is generational, and Black families have missed out on the appreciation of home ownership. The homes that they did purchase in areas that are still segregated to this day saw significantly less appreciation than their white counterparts over the past half century. The massive increase in home prices means that Black families are now priced out of those neighborhoods, even though there's no longer a law technically preventing them from living there. Being excluded from early federal programs to encourage home ownership is the most significant contributor to the wealth inequality that persists between Black and white people today. And then for our last takeaways, Richard Rothstein highlights what many scholars, modern scholars, have highlighted, which is that white families, on average, have 10 times as much wealth than Black families. And this mostly comes from the equity in their homes. A larger percent of white families pass on much larger inheritances, and African Americans are 10 times as likely to live in poor neighborhoods than their white counterparts. So with all of these stressors, the additional stressors that come from living in a poor neighborhood, things like overcrowded homes, horrible schools, undereducated adults and role models, a lack of healthy food, food deserts, and of course, lack of healthcare, right? When you have a lack of healthcare, it becomes that much harder for our Black children to dig their way out. Segregation and the economic disadvantage that accompanies it have given a false sense of superiority to many white people who believe that they have earned what they have, and Black people just should have maybe worked a little bit harder. And the obstacles of getting out of cyclical, systemic, generational poverty in neighborhoods that have little access to jobs or educational resources that exist for disproportionate numbers of African Americans are far greater than what it takes for the average middle-class white person to end up with a steady, well-paying job. But here's the thing, y'all. The longer it goes on, the harder it is to undo. And Richard Rothstein contends that the only way to break this cycle is by implementing policy changes that are as aggressive as the policies that created the problem in the first place. And he is a white man that is doing it, and he is using this language. He is using the language of white and Black. And he is doing it because he's doing it in a very intentional way. It is an academic way. It is not inflammatory. It is not emotional. It is academic. And that is the lens that I ask you to look at our current segregation in this country through. Richard Rothstein presents several examples of states and metropolitan areas that are working to provide incentives to take vouchers in the middle income areas, even though some of that might require integration supporting measures. As one extreme example of a policy proposal that helps illustrate just how much damage was done, he recommends that the federal government purchase 15% of all the houses in the federally subsidized neighborhoods, such as Levittown, that followed discriminatory building requirements. So where houses are now selling for around $350,000, Richard Rothstein proposes selling those to Black families for $75,000. Now that's the price in today's dollars that would have paid back then what they would have paid back then when they were excluded from federal help. And of course, something like that would never get passed in Congress, right? Because it would be seen more as an undeserved handout to Black Americans. But the core issue is that no policy is going to be successful so long as the myth of de facto segregation pervades America. White Americans especially need to understand the part the government played in creating these problems before they can be solved. But it all comes down to education. Educating young children of all races about the federal, state, and local government policies, laws, and procedures that created these inequalities can bring up a generation of people who are more willing to enact the policies necessary to undo them. Next slide. Pending any questions that you have, this concludes my class for the evening. What questions do you have?
I just was struck by, like, the narrative that we hear about, like when there's any move towards federal programs focused on equity, that the narrative is, oh, well, Black people are looking for a handout because they're free riders, because they're, welfare queens, all of these bullshit tropes that we've been told. And when I looked at this presentation, I was like, who the real free riders are? It's us. We're free riding. And so I think, like, to disrupt any sort of talk that we hear from, like, me as a white person, my white counterparts, like, no, don't get it twisted. You know who the free riders are? It's us, because we're free riding off of centuries of segregation and privilege and wealth that is, like, not ours. And so I just feel like one thing that the critical race theory backing of this course has taught us is that like we need counter stories to the stories, the lies that we've been told, because it's really in the counter stories that there's truth. So just like, yeah, I appreciate that you brought up that any move towards equity is kind of framed as, oh, well, people want a handout. And so now it's like, oh, no, don't get it twisted. Now we have like a knowledge base to really call that logic into question. Well, like, let's think about what free riding means. So I just appreciate, again, some Thanksgiving dinner talking points I'm saving up.
Okay, thank you, Amelia. Thank you. All right, anybody else?
I would just add,
Yeah.
when this is what I think about when I hear white people say, oh, I don't see color. Because yeah, we do have to see color, because color is what got us to this place. And to like now say, oh, well, we're just going to start, we're at ground zero now, and ignore all of those inequities and past horrible things that have happened and continue to, I mean, we're still in the legacy of this, and we have to fix it. And we say, oh, we're post-racial. That's just not going to fly. It's just not going to work.
No. So, what I would say to that is, well, thank you both. That I don't know any other way to say it other than what I see in Athens, Georgia today is that, there really is, Black skin is paying for all of this goodness that we love about Athens. I mean, if you go to the Clark County Courthouse, it's nothing but Black people moving through that line. And I don't mean Black and brown people. I mean, it is Black people that are moving through that line. And it is like slavery, and it is slavery. And so what I would say is it will, because there is no like next generation of Black people that are going to be here, next generation, it's going to be up to the white people who live here to stand up, and stand up often. And so I challenge you all to do that, to do what Beth has done, to do what Barb Benson does all the time, to do what Amelia Wheeler has devoted her life to doing, to be that voice, because there aren't going to be very many Black people around here. I mean, we are being removed and upheaved. And so we really need our white friends and neighbors to stand up when there aren't any of us to stand up for ourselves. So anybody else? Anybody in the Zoom audience want to say anything? Indicate with a raising of your hand. Anybody? Helene, you want to say anything before we close out? Please, you're more than welcome.
I just want to reflect on the fact that when we're going to try to establish a different narrative, or to try to confront individuals, whether they be in our families, at Thanksgiving Day or whatever, but I think it's a problem because when they're deeply entrenched in that false narrative of Black people have asked for this kind of thing, without, even if you point out the reality of the laws and the structure and all this that's happened, they're going to hang on for dear life for all kinds of reasons. And one of them, I think, is that they need to feel superior for whatever reason. It's a very sad kind of way to be, but I think that is partly what we're going to confront when we meet individuals who want to hang on to that false narrative. So keeping that in mind, I don't know where we go with that. That yes, it needs to be addressed. Yes, the truth needs to be coming out. And yes, we need to be forceful about that and clear about the truth of things. But also understand that there's a psychology behind this that's entrenched, that there's a deeply rooted fear of giving up that superiority. And I don't know what else to say about that.
No, I think that's really powerful. And I appreciate you being here to share that. I think that your perspective in particular, you know, I hope that you go home and you think and reflect on this class and really think about Levittown and what that means for us today, you know. And thank you for bringing that experience into this room and into this space. I think that's awesome. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Okay, so Montu hit me up on a direct message. Montu, do you want to come off mute and say anything? You're more than welcome to.
No, I'm just here to listen. I'm just, soaking it in.
No worries, no worries. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. All right. What he said was numbers don't lie. They can hold on to what they want, but the data don't lie. So amen to that. Amen to that. All right. Anybody have anything else? Okay. Well, it is 10 till and the mall closes in 10 minutes. So I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody that I forgot to thank before, which are Dr. Maurice Daniels, Johnny Lay Burks, Aurelia Scott, Ovita Thornton, my dad who is on the call tonight. Hey, shout out to Charles Napper. Thanks for being here to support me, Daddy. I appreciate it. Annie Markham, Amelia Wheeler, Beth Mendenhall, Helene, Sam, Courtney, Sierra, Natalie. What? I'm getting them all. But thank you all for being here and for your support and for being a part of the change that we want to see. And I am so thankful to you. And I know that we are due for transformational change through education. And so thank you all for being a part of the Pledge to Teach the Truth movement. And thank you, Amelia H. Wheeler, for continuing on in this work and leading it. Thank you.
Yeah,
All
let's
right.
get it. That's right, Montu. And let's give it up for Chaplain Cole one more time. She does a really good job of making everybody else feel really good about themselves. So just keep it going because she just rocked it, y'all. She really did.
All right. Thank y'all very much. Have a great night. If you were here in person, you could have had the wonderful food catered from Rashi's. But if you're not, we will be doing one last Teach the Truth class. I believe it's going to be on December 2nd. And we'll be posting information about that on the AADM website and Facebook page. All right. Thank you to y'all. Thank you. Y'all have a good night. Bye.
Thanks, Chaplain Cole. That was fabulous. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Barb. Thanks, Annie.